The glass conference room on the 45th floor blazed with light. Billionaire CEO Clara Hayes tapped her hand on the table, voice cold. "Who prepared this financial report?" A man in a janitor's uniform standing in the corner stepped forward, holding a printout. "I just noticed a small error, so..." "What do you know about finance that you dare to interrupt? Finish mopping and get out." The entire room laughed. He stayed silent, placing the printout on the table. "If I'm wrong, you can fire me, but if I'm right..." He looked directly at her. "You should check the company's Cayman investment account." The boardroom went dead silent. She frowned. Who are you?" He replied, "The person who built this company before you inherited it." Ethan Ward, 42 years old, single father, former chief financial officer who lost everything after an internal conspiracy. Clara Hayes, 33 years old, new CEO, founder's daughter, confident, cold, and lacking trust in others. Lily Ward, 8 years old, Ethan's daughter, loves math and dreams of becoming a fair bookkeeper. 5 years ago, Ethan had been the youngest CFO in Hayes Group history. When the old CEO passed away, the new board accused him of falsifying reports. He was forced to leave the company, lost his ownership rights, carried a stain he couldn't wash away. He chose silence, knowing the mastermind was a close partner of the new CEO, Clara Hayes, the old boss's daughter. Now he worked as a janitor in the very building he once commanded, to support his daughter and find evidence in silence. Every night he stayed late, mopping floors, organizing files, reviewing numbers. "What are you looking for, Daddy?" "The truth, sweetheart." But truth usually hides under layers of dust. Meanwhile, Clara, the new CEO, faced pressure to maintain stock prices. She looked down on all lower-level employees. Once, she caught Ethan helping the financial advisor check a balance sheet. "Who do you think you are, touching my documents?" "Someone who knows numbers don't lie," she spoke coldly. "Get out before I have security remove you." He bowed his head, smiling. "You can throw me out of the room, but not out of the truth." But Ethan's story went deeper than anyone in that building knew. 5 years ago, he'd been celebrated. Forbes 30 under 30. The financial genius behind Hayes Group's meteoric rise. The man who'd restructured the company's debt, secured critical partnerships, tripled shareholder value in 3 years. He'd been Michael Hayes' right-hand man. The old CEO had treated him like a son. "You're the future of this company, Ethan. When I'm gone, I trust you'll keep it honest." Then Michael had died suddenly. Heart attack. And his daughter Clara, who'd been working in the London office, had flown home to take over. Young, ambitious, surrounded by advisors who saw opportunity in her inexperience. Chief among them was Richard Sterling, the new CFO who'd replaced Ethan. Richard had been Michael's college roommate, a man everyone trusted. He'd approached Clara with concerns about Ethan's financial management. "These numbers don't add up. I think he's been embezzling. We need to act quickly before the board finds out." Clara, grieving and overwhelmed, had believed him, had called Ethan into her office and delivered the ultimatum: resign quietly or face criminal charges. Ethan had seen the falsified documents Richard had prepared, had known he could fight, could prove his innocence, could destroy Richard in court. But Clara had been so certain, so convinced of his guilt, and fighting would have meant dragging Michael's name through the mud, exposing the company to scandal, potentially destroying everything the old man had built. So Ethan had walked away, had signed the non-disclosure agreement, had taken the severance and the shame. His wife had left him 6 months later. "I can't be married to a criminal. What will people think?" She'd taken everything in the divorce except Lily, whom she'd considered too much responsibility. So Ethan had rebuilt from nothing, had applied to dozens of financial firms only to be rejected because of the rumors, had finally taken a janitorial job because it was the only thing he could get. And he'd returned to Hayes Group specifically, not for revenge, but because he'd noticed something in those final days. Small inconsistencies in Richard's numbers, patterns that suggested ongoing fraud. If Richard had framed Ethan, He was probably still stealing, and Ethan couldn't let that stand. Not when it meant destroying Michael's legacy. Not when innocent employees would lose their jobs when the truth came out. So he'd become invisible. A janitor nobody looked at twice, and he'd watched, waited, gathered evidence piece by piece. Tonight, finally, he had enough to act. A security guard later recounted, he never argued, just worked quietly, but his eyes, they looked like they could see through walls. 1 month later, Clara called a shareholder meeting. The fourth quarter report had strange errors, but the new CFO said it was just a data entry mistake. Ethan overheard from the accounting department that there was mysterious cash flow from the Cayman Islands. He printed it out, marked every number. That morning, he happened to be cleaning the conference room before the CEO's presentation. When he heard Clara ask, "Does anyone have other opinions?" he looked up and said quietly, "I can point out the hidden losses." The whole room turned to look. She laughed. "Janitors read reports too? What do you know about finance?" He stayed calm. "Enough to see you're being deceived." "Oh, really?" Line 347, the investment in the Cayman fund, no returns. It's just internal money laundering transfers. The entire room went silent. The CFO's face went pale. Clara shouted, "Security, remove this man." As security approached, Ethan said loudly, "Before I go, check the backup server. The real documents are there." She hesitated. "Open it." The screen showed massive amounts of money disappearing into anonymous accounts. The recipient name was the CFO himself. She stood frozen. Ethan turned to leave. "You trust numbers but not people. That's why this company is collapsing." But what happened next took even Ethan by surprise. Richard Sterling stood up, face red with rage and panic. "This is absurd. This man is a disgraced former employee trying to sabotage us. Don't listen to him." Clara looked between them, confused. "You two know each other?" "He's Ethan Ward," Richard spat. "The CFO we fired for embezzlement 5 years ago. He's making up lies for revenge." Ethan smiled sadly. "Check the server, Clara. The truth doesn't care about our history." The IT director, hands shaking, pulled up the backup files. Transaction after transaction. Money flowing out of the company through shell corporations. Invoices for services never rendered. Payments to vendors that didn't exist, and every single one authorized by Richard Sterling. This can't be right," Clara whispered. "Richard, tell me this isn't real." Richard tried to run. Security grabbed him at the door. As they dragged him away, he screamed at Ethan, "You self-righteous bastard, you think you're so noble? You lost everything. Your wife, your career, your reputation. And for what? To save a company that threw you away?" Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. "I didn't do this for the company. I did it for the man who built it. Your friend. Michael Hayes deserved better than to have his legacy stolen by someone he trusted." The room erupted after Richard was removed. Board members arguing. Lawyers making calls, journalists somehow already getting wind of the story. Clara stood at the head of the table, visibly shaken, trying to process that her father's trusted friend had been stealing for years, that she'd fired an innocent man, that a janitor had just saved her company. She looked at Ethan, who was calmly picking up his cleaning supplies, preparing to leave. "Wait," she called out, "please, don't go yet." He paused. "I've said what I needed to say." "How long have you known? About Richard?" "I suspected when he framed me. I've been gathering proof ever since." 5 years? You spent 5 years working as a janitor to catch him? I spent 5 years keeping my promise to your father. He asked me to keep this company honest. I'm just finishing the job." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I fired you. I believed Richard over you. I destroyed your life. You did what you thought was right with the information you had. I don't hold that against you. How can you not? I would hate me. Hate takes energy I need for raising my daughter. Forgiveness is easier." An older board member stood up, someone who'd been there in Michael's time. "Mr. Ward, I owe you an apology. We all do. We should have investigated properly. We should have trusted Michael's judgment of character over circumstantial evidence." Others nodded, murmuring agreement. Ethan looked around the room at all these powerful people, finally seeing him as more than furniture. I don't need apologies. I need you to run this company the way Michael wanted, with integrity. That's all. Then help us, the board member said. Come back. Be our CFO again. Fix what Richard broke. I'm not qualified anymore. 5 years out of finance. You just uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme while mopping floors, Clara interrupted. You're the most qualified person in this building. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the cold CEO persona to the grieving daughter, trying to live up to an impossible legacy. I'll think about it, he said finally. But first I need to finish my shift. I have floors to mop. As he left the room, pushing his cleaning cart, every person in that boardroom stood up, not clapping, not cheering, just standing in respect, in acknowledgement, in apology. An employee later said, I've never seen the boardroom that quiet. The CEO was shaking and he just said, I do this for fairness, not revenge. Immediately after, Clara launched an internal investigation. The CFO was arrested for embezzling $27 million. The press exploded. Hayes Company avoids disaster. Thanks to words from a janitor. Clara went to the security office. Ethan Ward, did you intentionally come back to the company? No, I just haven't finished my work. Were you really the CFO? You can check the old files. I just wanted to see that the company your father trusted wouldn't be destroyed. Why didn't you speak up sooner? Because you wouldn't have listened. She fell silent, then asked, What do you want? Nothing. I just want to go mop other floors. The next day, Clara stepped into a press conference and announced, I apologize. I mocked the person who saved the company. From now on, Mr. Ethan Ward returns as honorary advisor. The press went wild. Ethan only said briefly, Don't call me a hero. I just cleaned one more dirty spot. But the story was more complicated than a simple redemption arc. Over the next week, as forensic accountants dug deeper into Richard's schemes, they uncovered something shocking. Richard hadn't just been stealing. He'd been systematically undermining the company's actual profitable ventures while funneling money into shell corporations he controlled. The Cayman account Ethan had identified was just the tip. There were accounts in Luxembourg, the Bahamas, Singapore, properties purchased under false names, investments in competitors designed to sabotage Hayes Group from within. Richard had been planning a hostile takeover. He'd wanted to tank the stock price, buy up shares through his hidden entities, then force the board to sell to him at a fraction of its value. And he'd almost succeeded. When Clara reviewed the full extent of the damage, she realized that without Ethan's intervention, Hayes Group would have collapsed within 6 months. 20,000 employees would have lost their jobs. Her father's 40-year legacy would have been sold for parts. She called an all-staff meeting. Every employee, from executives to maintenance workers, gathered in the main auditorium. I need to tell you something, Clara began, her voice shaking. This company almost died. Not from market forces or competition or bad luck, from betrayal, from greed, from my inability to see what was right in front of me. She gestured to Ethan, standing awkwardly at the side of the stage. 5 years ago, I fired this man, Ethan Ward. I believed lies about him. I thought he was a criminal. I let him leave in disgrace. The crowd murmured. Many had heard rumors but didn't know the full story. The truth is, Ethan Ward was the best CFO this company ever had. And when I fired him, he didn't sue, didn't go to the press, didn't try to destroy us out of spite. Instead, he came back as a janitor, working nights, gathering evidence, protecting us from the inside. She looked at Ethan. He saved us, not for money, not for recognition, not even for vindication. He did it because my father once asked him to keep this company honest, and he keeps his promises. The auditorium erupted. Some people stood, others cried. The maintenance workers, Ethan's colleagues for 5 years, chanted his name. Ethan stepped to the microphone, uncomfortable with the attention. I don't want to be praised. I want you all to remember something. This company is built on people. Every person here matters, from the CEO to the newest janitor. And when we forget that, when we start thinking some people are worth more than others, that's when we fail. He looked out at the sea of faces. I spent 5 years invisible. People walked past me every day without seeing me, talked about confidential things assuming I didn't understand, threw trash on floors I just cleaned without thinking. Not because they were bad people, but because they'd been taught that janitors don't matter. But janitors matter, receptionists matter, security guards matter, mailroom clerks matter, everyone matters. And if this company is going to honor Michael Hayes' memory, it needs to remember that. The applause was deafening. Later that day, Clara found Ethan in his usual supply closet, organizing cleaning products. "You're not actually going to keep mopping, are you?" "I'm thinking about it. It's honest work." "It's beneath your abilities." "No work is beneath anyone. That's the whole point." "Okay, you're right. I phrased that badly. What I mean is we need you in finance. We need your brain, your ethics, your everything you have. You need someone you can trust. That's not about credentials. It's about character. And you have character, more than anyone I've ever met." Ethan smiled. "Your father had character. I just learned from him. He loved you, you know. He talked about you all the time." Ethan thinks this. Ethan suggested that. I'm ashamed to admit, I was jealous. Jealous of how proud he was of you. He was proud of you too, Clara. He talked about you constantly, how smart you were, how driven. He just wished you were here more so he could know you better. I stayed away because I didn't think I could live up to his expectations. And then when he died, I tried so hard to be what I thought he wanted that I became someone he would have hated. Cold, suspicious, cruel to people who worked for me. You can change that, starting now. Will you help me, please? I'm not asking you to be CFO. I'm asking you to be my advisor, my conscience, my connection to the man my father was. Because I'm lost, Ethan, and I need someone who knew him to help me find my way. Ethan considered this. Okay, but on one condition, anything. I stay on the janitorial schedule, 1 night a week. Keep me humble. Keep me connected to the people who actually run this place. Clara laughed through tears. Deal. An accounting employee shared. When he walked into the elevator, everyone stood up. The CEO was crying for real. 1 week later, Clara visited his home, a small apartment. Lily was drawing a picture of 2 people holding hands in front of the Hayes building. What is your daughter drawing? It's called The Day of Justice. Clara spoke softly. I've never apologized to anyone, but today I apologize to you and to the father I once trusted. Not necessary. Forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it helps us choose the present, she smiled. You still talk like a CFO. No, just a janitor who knows how to clean his own heart. But the real work of rebuilding had just begun. Ethan's first official day as senior advisor was deliberately understated. No big office, no executive assistant, just a desk in the finance department where he could work alongside the team, not above them. The finance staff had been terrified. They'd worked under Richard for 5 years, following his orders, processing his fraudulent transactions without knowing they were fraudulent. Are we going to be fired? One young analyst asked. Why would I fire you? Ethan replied. We helped him, even if we didn't know. You followed orders from your boss. That's not a crime. Now you're going to help me rebuild a system where something like this can't happen again. Over the next weeks, Ethan implemented changes. Transparency in all transactions, dual sign-off requirements, regular audits by rotating external firms. But more than process changes, he changed the culture. He had lunch in the cafeteria, not the executive dining room, the employee cafeteria, with janitors and accountants and security guards, and whoever happened to sit at his table. He arrived early, left late, and always stopped to learn people's names, to ask about their families, to treat everyone like they mattered, because they did. Clara watched this and learned. She started doing the same, walking the floors, actually listening when employees talked, remembering that a company wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet, but thousands of individual human lives. One evening, she found Ethan in the supply closet, actually mopping floors as per their agreement. You know you don't really have to do this. Yes, I do. Reminds me where I came from. Keeps me honest. Can I help? He handed her a mop. Ever done this before? No. Then you need to learn. CEO should know every job in the company. So Clara mopped. Badly at first, missing spots, using too much water. But Ethan taught her with patience and humor, and gradually she got better. This is harder than it looks, she said. Everything is. That's what people forget. They think jobs are easy because they don't do them. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Clara said, Lily seems like a great kid. She is. She's the only thing that kept me going these 5 years. She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. She reminds me why character matters. Because someday she'll be out in the world, and the example I set now is what she'll follow. You're setting a good example. I'm trying. Some days are better than others. They finished the hallway, and as they put away the cleaning supplies, Clara said, Thank you, Ethan, for coming back, for saving us, for teaching me what my father tried to teach me years ago. What's that? That a company is only as good as the people in it, all the people. And if you take care of them, they'll take care of you. Your father was a wise man. I'm starting to understand that. From this day forward, I choose to look at each person a little longer, to see the human behind the uniform, the story behind the silence. I will live with kindness. 1 year later, Hayes Group returned to the top 10 most reputable corporations. Clara remained CEO, but every morning she visited the maintenance department, greeting each cleaning worker. On the internal bulletin board hung a quote, "A janitor can save a company if you're willing to listen to them." Ethan taught Lily about balancing expenses, taught her that numbers never lie, only people lie about numbers. At the year-end awards ceremony, Clara presented Ethan with the Lifetime Integrity Award. Without him, I wouldn't have this company, and I wouldn't have myself. He only replied, I didn't save anyone. I just made clean what was already meant to be. But the real transformation was visible in every department, every interaction, every decision. Hayes Group had implemented a new policy, the CEO Council. Once a month, Clara met with randomly selected employees from all levels, not just managers, frontline workers, the people who actually made the company function. Janitors sat at the same table as vice presidents. Security guards gave input on company strategy. Receptionists shared ideas about customer service. And Clara listened, really listened. Employee satisfaction scores had skyrocketed. Turnover had dropped by 60%. Productivity was up. And somehow treating people well had turned out to be good for business. Who knew? The industry took notice. Other CEOs started visiting, wanting to understand the Hayes transformation. Clara always sent them to talk to Ethan. What's your secret? They'd ask. No secret. Just remember that every person in your building has value. Every single one. From the person who cleans the toilets to the person in the corner office. Treat them all with respect. Pay them fairly. Listen to their ideas. Pretty simple, really. But how do you scale that? You don't scale respect. You just practice it. Every day. With every person. It's not a program or an initiative. It's a choice. 2 years after the revelation, on the anniversary of Michael Hayes' death, the company held a memorial service. Clara spoke, her voice strong but emotional. My father built this company on 2 principles, excellence and integrity. For a while, I forgot that. I chased excellence and abandoned integrity, and I almost lost everything. She looked at Ethan, standing in the back with Lily. But my father was wise. He surrounded himself with people who understood what mattered. And one of those people loved this company enough to become invisible, to sacrifice his pride and his reputation, to save what my father built. She held up a photo of Michael and Ethan together, taken years ago at a company celebration. Both men smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. This is what a company should look like. Not bosses and workers, not executives and staff, just people working together, taking care of each other, building something worth building. After the ceremony, Ethan found himself surrounded by employees wanting to thank him, to tell him their stories, to shake his hand. Lily watched with pride. Daddy, everyone loves you. No, sweetheart, They love what we all built together. I was just the janitor who cleaned the windows so everyone could see clearly again. Clara approached and Lily immediately ran to hug her. It had become their tradition. The CEO and the janitor's daughter, friends. You know what the best part of all this is? Clara asked Ethan. What? My father would be proud, not of the stock price or the awards or the press coverage, but of this. People treating each other well. That's what he wanted all along. That's what any good person wants. Then we're all good people now. Finally. As the sun set over the city, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows Ethan had cleaned 1,000 times, the three of them stood together. CEO, advisor, child, leader, mentor, future. And on the memorial plaque dedicated to Michael Hayes, the inscription read, "He taught us that every person matters. We finally learned the lesson." Ethan touched the plaque gently. "I kept my promise, Michael. The company's honest again." Lily took his hand. "Was Mr. Michael nice?" "The nicest. He saw value in everyone, just like I'm teaching you to do." "I will, Daddy. I promise." And in that promise, in that simple commitment from a child to see the worth in all people, the real legacy lived on, not in stock prices or quarterly reports, but in character, in kindness, in the revolutionary act of treating everyone, as if they matter, because they do. If you believe stories of healing like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe. We tell stories that should never be forgotten.